The forbidden connection, the grand halls of the Zur Empire stood tall and silent. Their walls carved with the history of countless battles, dim light flickered from crystal lanterns, casting long shadows across the throne room. At the center on a throne made of black stone sat Queen Vayax, her piercing violet. Eyes scanned the room, filled with whispers that refused to be silenced. "Have you heard?" one advisor whispered, leaning close to another. Commander Sirac. "With a human, impossible," another hissed back. "No Zur would ever lower themselves to bond with them." But the whispers grew louder, traveling like a cold wind. Through the hall, Queen Vaya raised her hand, and the room fell silent. She did not need to speak. Her gaze alone demanded answers. Then the doors to the throne room creaked open. Heavy footsteps echoed as Commander Kak entered. His tall, muscular frame moved with precision, but there was something unusual in his eyes, a flicker of hesitation. The Queen's voice was calm but sharp. "Commander Sak, you have served the Empire with honor. Yet whispers reach me, whispers I cannot ignore." Sak stood still, his jaw tight. He knew what was coming. "Tell me," the Queen continued, her voice cold as steel. Have you formed a bond with a human?" The room held its breath. Kak's heart pounded in his chest. The memories rushed back, memories he wished he could forget. But never would. He had fought humans, hated them. They were impulsive, weak, or so he believed until that day. It had been a battlefield far from Zur territory. The air was thick with smoke and the smell of burning metal. Sirac, separated from his unit, had found himself surrounded by hostile alien beasts. His weapon was low on energy, his strength fading. He thought it was his end. Then through the chaos a figure appeared, a human. Sak had heard tales of them, fragile, emotional beings who barely understood war. But this one was different. "Stay down," the human shouted, firing at the beasts with deadly accuracy. Kak's pride burned. He did not need help, especially from a human. But as the beasts grew in number, he realized there was no choice. Back to back, they fought, covering each other without a question. When the battle ended, Sirac turned to the human. "Why did you save me?" The human captain, Nies Voss, smiled faintly. "We may be different, but we're both fighting to survive." Sak had no answer. For the first time, he saw strength not in power, but in loyalty. Over time their paths crossed again and again. Each time Sak found himself questioning everything he had been taught. Elias showed kindness, even when it was not deserved. He believed in protecting those who fought beside him, no matter their species. And Sirac, against all logic, began to believe it too. Now, standing before the Queen, those memories burned in his mind. He knew the consequence of the truth, but lies would not save him. "Yes, Ck," said his voice steady. "I have found unity with a human." Jests echoed through the hall. Advisors exchanged horrified glances. A Zur warrior admitting such a thing was unthinkable. The Queen's eyes narrowed, and her grip on the throne tightened. "You betray your kind for a creature of weakness." Sak met her gaze. "They are not weak. Humans fight not just for survival, but for each other. I have seen their strength." The Queen stood, her dark robe flowing behind her like a shadow. She descended the steps slowly, each step filled with quiet rage. "Your loyalty is to the Empire, nothing else." Sak clenched his fists. "My loyalty is to what is right." The Queen circled him, her voice a dangerous whisper. "Then you are a traitor." Before Sirac could respond, a sharp voice echoed from the side. "Wait." A messenger hurried in, bowing deeply. "My Queen, we have captured the human." Kak's blood ran cold. "Elias," the Queen's lips curled into a cruel smile. "Good, perhaps your bond can be broken." Kak's mind raced. He knew what the Queen was capable of. Elias was strong, but no human could endure Zur interrogation for long. "I will make sure your human understands the cost of unity," the Queen whispered, turning away. Sirac felt the weight of every eye in the room on him, but his mind was focused on one thing. Elias needed him. As the Queen gave orders, Sirac made a silent vow. He would not let Elias suffer, no matter what it cost him. The unthinkable bond. The cold silence of the Zur throne room still echoed in Sirac's mind. As he was escorted away, his body moved, but his thoughts were trapped in the past, a past where a single moment had shattered centuries of belief. Sirac remembered the first time he met Elias Voss, not as an ally, not even as an enemy, but as two survivors forced to rely on each other. It had been the Battle of Khan Rift, A desolate wasteland floating between galaxies. Sack's unit had fallen ambushed by the monstrous rift stalkers, alone, wounded, and out of ammunition. Surak prepared for his final stand. Zor warriors never begged for mercy. They fought until their last breath. But death did not come. Instead, there was a bright flash, followed by the sharp crack of a human rifle. The beasts howled and retreated into the shadows. Surak, breathing heavily, turned to see a human soldier, tall with sharp blue eyes that the coldness of space didn't expect to see. A Zolthur, still standing. The human said, reloading his weapon. Pride bristled. I do not need your help, human. The human chuckled softly. You're welcome. The two stood in the ruins, the silence between them heavy. Finally, the human extended his hand. Captain Elis Foss. Surak hesitated. Trust was not given easily, especially not to humans, but survival demanded cooperation. Slowly, he clasped the human's hand. Commander Surak of the Zur, their alliance was meant to be temporary, just until they found their way out, but the rift had other plans. Days turned into weeks as they navigated the endless ruins, facing creatures that thrived in darkness. It was during those endless nights that Surak's perception began to shift. One night, while resting near the wreckage of an old ship, Elis shared stories of Earth, of a blue planet filled with life, chaos, and beauty. He spoke of families, friendships, and sacrifices. Humans are flawed, Elis admitted, gazing at the distant stars. But we fight for each other. That's what keeps us going. Sack had scoffed. Emotions make you weak. Elias had only smiled. No, they make us strong. Sack did not understand then, but the longer they fought side by side, the more he saw that strength. It wasn't in their weapons or their technology, it was in their loyalty. When Surak was injured, Elias carried him through the ruins, refusing to leave him behind when food ran low. Elias split his share, even when it meant going hungry. It was a bond forged not by choice, but by survival, and it was unbreakable now. Back in the present, Kak's heart pounded as he was thrown into a holding cell deep within the palace. The door slammed shut, but Sack barely noticed. His mind was consumed by one thought. Elis was captured. He knew what awaited the human Zul. Her interrogations were brutal, and Elias, despite his strength, was still human. Sack clenched his fists, fury building within him. He had to find a way out. He had to save Elias. But how? A faint voice echoed in his mind. Elias's voice. We'll always find a way. Sarek, together. Yes, together. As Sack plotted his escape miles away in a dimly lit chamber, Elias Voss sat chained to a cold metal chair. His breathing was heavy, but his spirit remained unbroken. The door opened, and Queen Vena entered, her eyes gleaming with cruelty. So this is the human who has caused such ruption, she whispered, circling him like a predator. Elias smirked. Despite the pain, nice place you got here, a little dark. Though the Queen's smile faded. Your arrogance won't save you. Commander Kak's loyalty to you will be his downfall. Elias's expression hardened. Sack is more loyal than you'll ever understand. The Queen leaned closer. We'll see how loyal he remains when you're gone. But Elias knew one thing for sure. Surak was coming for him, and nothing in the universe could stop him. The Queen's judgment. The cold air of the Zur Palace bit at Surak's skin as he sat in the dimly lit cell. His mind was sharp, but his heart felt heavy. Every second that passed was a moment Elias was in danger. He could almost hear the human's voice, calm and steady, reminding him that giving up was never an option. Footsteps echoed down the corridor, pulling Sack from his thoughts. The heavy metal door slid open with a hiss, revealing two guards with sharp, emotionless eyes. The Queen has summoned you, one growled. Kak stood tall, his gaze unwavering. Then, let's not keep her waiting. They led him through the winding halls of the palace. The walls, carved with stories of Zur victories, now felt like a cage closing in around him. As they reached the grand throne room, the doors opened, revealing Queen Vena seated upon her throne, her violet eyes burning with cold fury. At her side stood Elias, chained and bruised, but his eyes still held that familiar spark. Their eyes met for a brief moment, just enough for Elias to give Surak a faint, reassuring nod. You disappoint me, Commander. The Queen's voice cut through the room like a blade. I have given you everything, power, honor, purpose, and yet you throw it away for him. Surak clenched his fists, but remained silent. Speak. she demanded, her voice echoing through the chamber. Sirak's voice was steady. I do not betray the Empire. I protect it. The Queen's laughter was sharp and cruel. By siding with a human, by forming a bond with a creature driven by emotion and chaos, Elias, despite his restraint, chuckled softly. You say that like it's a bad thing. The Queen's eyes snapped to him. Silence stepped forward, his voice louder now. It is their emotion that makes them strong, their loyalty, their courage, their willingness to sacrifice everything for each other. That is something you will never understand. The Queen stood, her robes flowing like shadows around her. Enough of this. You will renounce your bond with the human, or face the consequences. Kak's heart pounded. He knew what she meant. Elias's life hung in the balance. But before he could respond, Elias spoke up. Don't do it, Sak. The Queen's eyes narrowed. You don't have a choice, Commander. Sak took a deep breath, his mind racing. He could not abandon Elias, not now, not ever. He looked directly at the Queen, his voice clear and unwavering. I choose loyalty to him. The room fell silent, the Queen's face twisted in rage. Then you will both suffer. She raised her hand, signaling to the guards. But before they could act, Sak moved with lightning speed, disarming one guard and knocking the other unconscious. Elias grinned. Took you long enough, Sirak smirked. I had to make an entrance. He freed Elias from his chains, and together they faced the Queen. This isn't over, she hissed, disappearing into the shadows. But Sak and Elias didn't have time to worry about her now. They had to escape, and they would do it together. The rescue and escape. The air was thick with tension as Sirak and Elias stood side by side in the grand throne room of the Zur Palace. The Queen had vanished into the shadows, but her presence lingered like a storm waiting to break. Time was against them, and Sirak knew it. Not exactly the reunion I was hoping for, Elias muttered, rubbing his wrists where the chains had been. His voice was calm, but his sharp blue eyes flicked around the room, assessing their next move. Kak's grip tightened around the guard's weapon. He had seized. We need to move now. Alarms blared through the palace, a deepening sound that echoed through every corridor. Red warning lights flashed, casting the metallic walls in an eerie glow. The entire palace knew they had escaped, and the hunt had begun. Lead the way, Commander, Elias said with a grin. Sirak didn't waste time. He sprinted down the hallway. Elias closed behind him. The palace was a maze, but Sak knew it well. Each turn they took brought them closer to the outer gates and freedom. But the Zur guards were relentless. From the left corridor, a squad of armored soldiers appeared, their weapons raised. Without hesitation, Kak fired first, his shots precise. Elias ducked behind a pillar, returning fire with sharp accuracy. I thought you hated humans, Elias shouted over the noise. DK smirk, reloading. I still might fare. They moved swiftly, covering each other as they advanced, as warrior instincts combined with Elias's human unpredictability made them a formidable pair. As they reached the central courtyard, the grand gates loomed ahead. Freedom was within reach, but standing between them and the exit was a heavily armed battalion of Zur soldiers. Elias whistled softly. That's a lot. Sak's jaw clenched. We faced worse. Elias glanced at him. Have we before? Sak could answer. A voice echoed through the courtyard. Commander Sak, surrender now, and your punishment will be swift. Queen Vaya stepped forward, flanked by her elite guards. Her violet eyes burned with fury. Elias leaned toward Sak. Any brilliant plans? Sak's eyes scanned the area. Yes, don't die. Elias chuckled. Solid plan. The Queen raised her hand, signaling her soldiers to attack. Bolts of energy filled the air as Sirak and Elias dove for cover. Sak fired back, taking down several guards with ruthless efficiency. Elias, using his quick reflexes through a small explosive device he had lifted from one of the fallen guards. The blast scattered the enemies, giving them a moment's advantage. Didn't know humans fought dirty, Sarah commented. Survival isn't dirty, it's necessary. Elias shot back. They pushed forward, weaving through the chaos. But the Queen wasn't done. She activated a force field, blocking the main gate. Great, Elias muttered. Any more surprises? Kak's mind raced. There had to be another way out. Then he remembered the maintenance tunnels beneath the courtyard. This way, Sirak shouted, leading Elias to a hidden hatch behind a statue. As they climbed down, the Queen's voice echoed behind them. You can't run forever, Sirak. You can't hide from me, Elias smirked, as he followed Serac into the tunnels. I think we just did. The tunnel was dark and narrow, but it led them away from the palace and into the wilderness. Beyond, as they finally emerged into the open night, Elias took a deep breath. The stars above seemed brighter. Freer Serac looked at him. We're not safe yet. Elias nodded. I know, but we're alive. And we're together. Sac allowed himself a small smile for now, but deep inside both knew their fight wasn't over. The Queen would come for them, and they would be ready. A heart-stopping standoff. The night sky stretched endlessly above them, starred shimmering like distant memories. The wilderness beyond the Zolth Palace was unforgiving, twisting canyons, jagged cliffs, and endless shadows. Serac and Elias moved swiftly through the rocky terrain, their footsteps silent, but their minds racing. Cac's sharp eyes scanned the horizon. We can't stop, Shek. Send hunters after us. Elias, breathing heavily but steady, grinned. You think I'd let you stop? Not a chance. A faint hum echoed in the distance, the unmistakable sound of Zerskop drones. They're close, Sac muttered. Then we better be closer to an escape, Elias replied. They reached the edge of a canyon, the path narrow and treacherous. Serac paused, calculating. We cross here, he said. Elias peered over the edge. The drop dizzying, no pressure. They'd moved carefully, but halfway across the hum grew louder. Lights flickered in the sky. Drones, Sac warned without hesitation. Elias fired at the nearest drone, hitting it dead center. It exploded in a burst of sparks, but the others swarmed in. Go, Sac ordered, covering Elias as he sprinted across. Energy blasts sizzled through the air as Cac returned fire. The drone circled like vultures. Suddenly the cliff beneath Sac cracked. The ground gave way. Sac, Elias shouted, lunging forward just in time to grab Sac's arm. Sac dangled over the abyss, the drone still attacking. Let me go, Elias gritted his teeth. Not a chance. With a sharp pull, Elias hauled Sac up. Together they fired at the drones, destroying the last of them. Sac, catching his breath, glanced at Elias. You're reckless. Elias smirked. You're welcome. But before they could celebrate, a new sound echoed behind them, the low hum of Zur transport ships. They're here, Serac said grimly. The ships landed, and from the shadows emerged Queen Vena and her elite warriors. Running is pointless, the Queen said, her voice smooth but deadly. You cannot escape me. Cac stepped forward, weapon raised. We'll see. The Queen tilted her head, amused. Do you really believe you can defeat me? Sac alone? Elias, stepping beside Sac, grinned. Who said he's alone? The Queen's eyes narrowed. A human standing against me? Foolish. Elias chuckled. Maybe, but I've been called worse. The tension crackled in the air like static before a storm. The Queen raised her hand, and the battle erupted. Energy blasts lit up the canyon as Sac and Elias fought back to back. Every move was calculated, every shot precise. Sac disarmed as your warrior, using the enemy's own weapon against him. Elias, quick and unpredictable, outmaneuvered his attackers with sharp wit and even sharper aim. The Queen, watching, grew furious. She stepped into the fight, her weapon drawn. She fired at Elias, but Serac locked the shot with his own weapon. Their eyes met. Sac and the Queen's centuries of loyalty shattered in a single moment. You were my best, she whispered. Sac's voice was cold. You never deserved my loyalty. She lunged at him, their weapons clashing in a blur of sparks. Elias, dodging attacks, saw Sac struggling against the Queen's fierce strength. Hey, Queenie, Elias shouted. She turned, and Elias threw a small device at her feet. Smoke erupted, blinding her. Now, Elias yelled. Sac seized the moment, disarming the Queen and aiming his weapon at her. The battlefield fell silent. The Queen, breathing heavily, stared at him. Do it, she hissed. But Sac hesitated. Elias placed a hand on his shoulder. She's not worth it. Sac's hand shook, but finally he lowered his weapon. The Queen's eyes claimed weakness. No, Sac said firmly. It's strength. Elias smirked. We'll be going now. The two disappeared into the night, leaving the Queen behind. But both knew this wasn't the end. The real fight was yet to come. The truth of unity. The night air was thin and cold as Sac and Elias pushed forward through the barren wilderness. The battle behind them was still fresh in their minds, but the path ahead offered no comfort. Each step felt heavier than the last, not from exhaustion, but from the weight of what was coming. Cac's sharp eyes scanned the horizon. They were far from the palace now, but danger clung to them like shadows. "We need a plan," Elias said, breaking the silence. His voice, the light, carried an undertone of seriousness. Sack nodded. "The queen will not stop. She will hunt us until we are dead." Elias chuckled. Softly comforting thought. They found temporary shelter in a small cave hidden beneath jagged cliffs. The faint glow of a distant moon cast a soft light inside. Elias leaned against the wall, exhaling deeply. "This isn't just about us, is it?" Elias asked quietly. CK's gaze flickered. "No, it's about power." Old counter. Elias leaned forward. "Then why not just end her back there? You had the chance." Tack's eyes darkened. "Because if I did, I'd be no different from her." Elias nodded, slowly understanding. "And that's what scares her." Sack looked at him, curious. "Unity," Elias continued. "You and me, different species, different worlds. But we fight together. She rules through fear here. We fight through loyalty." Sack's voice softened. "She fears what she cannot control." Elias grinned. "Exactly, and nothing scarier than two rebels who won't back down." A faint noise outside caught their attention. Sack's hand immediately went to his weapon. Elias followed suit. "More of her goons," Elias whispered. "Worse," Sack replied grimly. From the darkness, tall figures emerged. Hunters, elite assassins trained by the queen herself. Silent, swift, and deadly. "They never stop, do they?" Elias muttered. "No," Sack replied, "but neither do we." The battle was swift and brutal. The hunters moved like shadows, but Sack knew their tactics too well. He countered every strike with precision. Elias, unpredictable as ever, fought with agility and wit, using the terrain to his advantage. As the last hunter fell, Elias wiped the sweat from his brow. "Remind me never to visit your home planet again." Sack smirked, faintly noted, but as they caught their breath, a new realization dawned on Sack. "This isn't about killing us." Elias raised an eyebrow. "Oh, could have fooled me. She's testing us," Sack explained, "pushing us to see how far we'll go." Elias frowned. "So what now?" Sack's eyes hardened. "We stop running." Elias stared at him, processing. "You want to go back?" "We confront her," Sack confirmed, "but not with weapons, with truth." Elias chuckled, shaking his head. "You're insane." "Perhaps," Sack admitted, "but it's the only way." Elias sighed, standing up. "Well, if we die, at least it'll be interesting." Sack's voice was steady. "We won't die, not today." Together they made their way back to the heart of the Zur Empire. The Grand Hall was eerily quiet when they arrived. Queen Vanna awaited them, flanked by her guards. "Brave," she sneered, "or foolish?" Sack stepped forward. "We are not here to fight." The queen laughed bitterly. "Then why are you here?" Elias smirked. "To give you a choice." The queen's eyes narrowed. "What choice?" Sack's voice was firm. "End this war. Embrace unity." The room fell silent. The queen's lips curled into a cold smile. "And why would I do that?" Elias answered softly. "Because if you don't, your empire will crumble." The queen's voice was venomous. "You think unity with humans will save us?" CK's gaze didn't waver. "I know it will." For the first time, the queen hesitated, and in that moment, the future began to shift. The queen admission. The Grand Hall of the Zur Empire stood in absolute silence. Surak and Elias faced Queen V, their hearts steady, but their minds sharp. This wasn't a battle of weapons anymore. It was a battle of ideals, of truth, of unity. The queen's violet eyes locked onto Sack. "You dare come here after everything?" Cack's voice was calm, but unwavering. "I came because I believe in something greater than war." Elias chuckled softly. "And because running forever gets tiring." The queen's expression darkened. "Humans always with their foolish humor." Elias grinned. "Hey, it keeps things interesting." V's voice sliced through the room. "You expect me to believe that unity with humans is the future, that our centuries of strength mean nothing now?" Sack stepped forward. "Our strength is fading because we fight alone. Humans survive not because they are the strongest, but because they fight for each other." The queen's gaze hardened. "Strength is power. Power is control." Elias shook his head. "No, strength is loyalty, and loyalty can't be forced." Her eyes flickered just for a moment. Doubt. It was faint, but it was there. Cack pressed on. "I once belly as you did. That power alone kept us strong. But then I met Elias. I fought beside him, and I learned that true strength comes from trust, from standing together." The queen's voice softened, almost a whisper. "And what if I cannot trust them?" Elias's voice was quiet but firm. "Then you'll never understand what makes us strong." The silence stretched heavy with unspoken Words finally, the queen spoke, her voice quieter than before. The whispers, they warned me of this day, of a bond that could change everything. Cac's eyes softened. Change isn't weakness, Elias added. Sometimes it's the only way to survive. The queen closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, they were still sharp, but something had shifted. I do not trust humans, she admitted, but I trust you. Sack nodded, understanding. The queen's voice was steady. The whispers were right. You found unity with the human. Elias grinned. Hold you, we not so bad. The queen gave a faint smile, barely. Therio, not make me regret this. Cac's voice was firm. We won't. And with that, the first step toward peace was taken, not through war, but through true understanding.